My view of it is not a nationalist argument, it's a democratic argument. You can't change the constitution of a country, a democracy, without consulting people, and they were not consulted by Heath. And also the power that has gone from the electors to the commissioners who are not elected. I mean, the commissioners are very powerful people, and they're not elected. I was on the Council of Ministers from 75 to 79, and I was president of the Council of Energy Ministers in 77. And it was the most frightening experience I've ever had in my life, because you sat there with the other ministers, you made laws, it was held in secret, unlike Parliament where you make laws in public. They're made in private by the ministers. Ministers are not allowed to put in documents, only the Commission can put in a document. It's like being a minister where you could only say yes or no to your civil servants. And it applied throughout the whole of Europe, overriding domestic legislation, and my concern has been about that. And now we have a new constitutional treaty which transfers more powers to Europe, and we are not going to be allowed even to say whether we approve it. And what is wrong about that is very straightforward. In a democracy, the sovereignty belongs to the people, not to Parliament. And if Parliament does transfer powers away, it is stealing rights that don't belong to it, because an MP is lent the powers of the public for 5 years, and then you have to hand it back in the next election. But if in the 5 years you give it away to somebody else, then in the next election you can't repeal the laws they've made. And it is a theft of public rights. And I feel very, very strongly about that. On the other hand, I'm not a nationalist. I don't want to go back to the old Europe where countries fought each other. You have to find a proper basis for European cooperation that doesn't erode democracy.
You mentioned the term constitutional treaty there.
Yes.
But many of the government members, such as Miliband and Gordon Brown, are saying that this is not a constitutional treaty. This is just a reform treaty, and that it doesn't actually comprise anything to do with the
Well, it's absolutely untrue. I mean, they said that about the treaty before. I mean, there's a 3-line whip issued by Blair against a referendum on the original treaty.
Right.
And then Murdoch said to him, if you don't support a referendum, we're not going to back you in the election. So then there was to be a referendum. Then in the last election, we pledged a referendum. Now they say it isn't really a constitutional treaty, just an amendment. It isn't. I mean, huge powers are being transferred. There'll be a European permanent president who won't be elected. There'll be a foreign secretary. There'll be European embassies all over the world. And I've got a list if you want me to go through all the changes there'll be. But these are fundamental changes. And if you have a referendum to decide whether you want a mayor of London, you can very well have a referendum when you want to take powers away from, the electors and hand it to people we didn't elect, can't remove, and who don't have to listen to us.
What do you think the level of public awareness is regarding this situation?
Well, in general, the British establishment is in favour of this. And indeed the BBC regards it as almost undiscussable. Only a handful of people, they say, are interested in their troublemakers and looking backwards and so on. So you get no proper coverage in the BBC whatsoever. The Murdoch press is still arguing for it, but at least there's a better balance now between those who are in favour and those who went against than there was in 1975. But you see, Brown says Parliament should decide, but he doesn't even mean that, because he's going to issue a 3-line whip. So Labour MPs will be ordered by the Prime Minister to make constitutional changes that affect their constituents without their constituents having a say, or without even the MP having a say. So it's back to a medieval system, really. And I think it's very, very frightening indeed.
Do you think that the treaty will be ratified in Parliament?
Well, I know you're asking me to forecast, but I mean, there will be MPs, Labour MPs will vote against it. But the Liberals have always been in favour of the European Federation. The Tories are divided on the subject. I imagine, unless there's some major change, the Prime Minister's expecting to win.
Sure. Now, the way you describe it, it doesn't sound like a very liberal or democratic entity, this European Union. Why do you think that some Liberal MPs are in favour of an EU?
Well, it's an interesting question why the Liberal Party should be in favour of it, Liberal Democrats. I mean, it was that issue, really, that led to the split in the Labour Party in 1981 when the Liberal Democrats, well, the Social Democrats went in and they joined with the Liberals. I can't anticipate their view, but the truth is that the electors lose their power to make the laws and change the laws. That is the crucial thing for me. I did publish a new constitution for Europe called the Commonwealth of Europe Bill, which I introduced, which would have got rid of the Commission, and you would have had a constitution for cooperation, but it would have to be with the consent of the nation states. And funnily enough, you see, although it's said that this will lead to a reduction of nationalism, it's actually more likely to lead to an explosion of nationalism, because when we discover we can't in Britain change the laws of Britain, then people will turn against the French and the Germans, when the problem isn't the French and the Germans, because they've lost the power too. The problem is the constitution. So just like Yugoslavia could break up, and I'm not in favour of nationalism, so I think that's the wrong approach. It's really back to a sort of imperial concept of Europe, and I don't want I don't want to ever go back to the old days where we fought each other, but there's not the only way of cooperating. And the European Parliament, you see, has no power over the law at all, the laws of Europe. We elect a European, we don't even elect a European MP, we elect for the party, and the party leaders pick who's in the European Parliament.
Sure.
So I can't write to a member of the European Parliament and say, I'm not voting for you again, because you write back and say, you didn't vote for me, you voted for the party. Whereas I can write to a local MP and say, I won't vote for you again, because I could defeat him, but I can't defeat a European a member of the European Parliament. So it is a complete fraud, I think, and a very, very dangerous one.
If the bill is ratified in the House of Commons, or the treaty, by the government, how difficult will it be for Britain then to...
Well, it'll be impossible. I mean, you cannot amend laws passed in Europe by previous governments. I know when I was first elected to Parliament in 1950, my dad, who'd been MP, said to me, Parliament does three things: controls the purse, that's the budget, controls the sword, that's the army, and it cannot bind its successors. Any government could repeal any laws passed by a previous government, but that's not true in Europe, because if any government enters into an agreement in the Council of Ministers to introduce a European law, it's not open to another government later to repeal it.
What can be done now then?
Well, I think the campaign for a referendum has got to build up, and I think it will build up before the debate in Parliament, and MPs will be put under a certain amount of pressure, because, I mean, there will be some people might say, I'll write to the MP and say, if you vote for this, I'm never voting for you again, because you have some control over MPs, and it may be that will be a factor.
Sure.
But my fear is, as I say, the whole thing is going to go wrong in a really dangerous way if we persist with moving powers, and then we become just a local authority. You know, Prime Minister will be mayor of the Greater British Authority, the GBA, if you know what I mean.
Is that
like Ken Livingstone is the mayor of the Greater London Authority.
Right, yeah. And the true power, legislative power, will be in the Commission.
Well, in the Council of Ministers, the Commission don't actually have power, but they run it.
Right.
But I mean, if you imagine, just for a moment, imagine Britain being run like Europe. You'd have a commissioner, a Scottish commissioner, a Welsh commissioner, an Irish commissioner, perhaps two London commissioners, and then people would be elected, the different prime ministers from the different parts, and they would meet in secret and make the laws. And they would have to abide by the choices offered to them by the civil servants. I mean, it's incredible. America, you do elect the president. We won't elect the president of Europe.
No.
We won't be able to control the European foreign policy. And gradually they're trying to suck you into a federation, and the people who favour of it have never had the guts to say what it's really about. They've told us just a little adjustment, it's just a trading agreement or a little bit of cooperation. But actually it is a fundamental change, as important as the Roman Empire was, but it's come in by the back door without people altogether realising what it's about.